Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kernan Webb. I am a professor in the Department of Law and Business at the Ted Rogers School of Management, which is located in Toronto Metropolitan University. But more important for today's discussion, I am the director of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility. And I'm very pleased to have with me here today research scholar Atul Ghorpade, who has done extensive research concerning the particular approach to corporate social responsibility in India done through the Companies Act of India. So it's a legally mandated approach, and looking forward to talking to him about that. Just to be clear here, all of the Toronto Metropolitan University CSR Institute sessions are animated by the idea of constructive engagement. That is to say, it's all about what can we learn from subject matter experts, and we come into all of the discussions with the view to this is a place where we can have honest and frank discussions and benefit from the particular experience and perspective that subject matter experts such as Atul have talking to an international community of government officials, intergovernmental officials, private sector individuals, civil society organizations and representatives, and academics and students who patch in for these sessions. Next slide, please. So we start off all of our sessions with this land acknowledgement, and that is to say that Toronto is located in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Next slide, please. We're also animated in all of these Toronto Metropolitan University CSR Institute sessions by the following definition of social responsibility, which comes from the ISO 26000 standard. ISO 26000 being a international standard, not part of the United Nations, not an international treaty or law, but rather the product of a consensus process involving governments, civil society, private sector, organizations, individuals from developed and developing countries to develop a standard on social responsibility. And that standard, ISO 26000, is more than 100 pages long, but it does include this consensus definition of social responsibility. And we use that as a kind of a touchstone for everything that we do here at the CSR Institute. Just to note that it basically indicates and highlights that it's about transparency. It's about transparency with respect to both decisions and impacts that an organization might have on society and on the environment. And it's all about contributing ultimately to health and welfare of society and sustainable development. It's all about taking into account the expectations of stakeholders. Note that that is stakeholders, not shareholders, so a broader ring of interests than just shareholders. And note that it's just taking into account the expectations. It's not necessarily meeting every concern of every stakeholder that's out there, is in compliance with applicable law, but also consistent with international norms of behavior, such as those you would find in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or many other different ILO conventions and treaties and declarations and so on. And it's not only integrating it within the organization itself, but also in the relationships that the organization has with others, whether that is communities or workers or consumers or governments or peer companies, whatever it might be, as the case may be. So that's the definition that we use for all of our CSR Institute events. Next slide, please. We're also animated by this concept of sustainable governance, which basically hangs on the idea that in the 21st century, where we are bombarded by a wide range of fast evolving technologies and economic developments and political developments, legal developments, and social developments, and so on. Really, the only way we can effectively address that, whether as individuals or as corporations or other types of organizations or as governments, is through a combination of public sector action, private sector action, and civil society action, sometimes working together collaboratively, sometimes working in more independently, sometimes in more of a rivalrous fashion, using a combination of rule instruments. So that could be law if we're talking about government, but it could be standards if we're talking about non-state entities. They can develop standards of a variety of different sorts. And it can involves typically a variety of different processes, auditing, inspections, and so on, and involving different institutions of different sorts, rulemaking institutions of government, such as parliament or legislatures, but also agencies or entities that are involved in ensuring conformity with the various different rule instruments, all of those sorts of things. And as I say, sometimes it involves collaboration, but sometimes it involves more of a rivalrous check and balance dynamic among the different institutions, instruments, actors, and processes of government, the private sector, and civil society. Next slide, please. And then breaking that down, institutions are defined as specialized entities performing public interest-oriented functions. So it could be rulemaking, it could be rule implementation, it could be rule adjudication, dispute resolution, rule instruments. It could be laws, but it could be standards or voluntary codes or what have you. Processes, everything from the processes of rulemaking, the processes of conformity assessment, and what do you do when there is a finding of non-compliance. And then in terms of actors, it's all of the individuals within these various different institutions, but it's those institutions and actors and so on are themselves actors at a more meta level, in addition to the individuals, whether they are judges or auditors or members of parliament or whatever it might be. So it's a combination of all of those. Next slide, please. The CSR Institute regularly has these sorts of talks, and what you need to do in order to find out about these talks is just check the Toronto Metropolitan University CSR Institute webpage, and you can see upcoming talks, but also you can patch in and click on to previous talks and all the other things that are going on. You can, all of these sessions are recorded, and you can patch in to a session once it's been recorded and catch it there. It's publicly accessible. The Toronto Metropolitan University and the Ted Rogers School of Management is doing a lot of work in this area. And so that's just another important point, is that there's a lot of work going on in the social responsibility space here at our university, as it is going on at many other universities around the world, including at Atul's university, very clearly. You can also get on an email list where I will be able to update you with upcoming talks and other developments. So many ways in which you can connect with the work that we're doing, and I welcome you to do that. Next slide, please. So we're really fortunate to have Atul with us. Atul is a PhD candidate. He's just on the precipice of getting his doctorate. He's just about to defend his thesis in the near future. And he's at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, in India. And as you can see, his research is right there at the intersection of corporate finance, sustainability, regulation, and political economy of CSR. And he's got a methodological focus on causal inference. And he'll be talking about the sorts of inferences he's been able to make so far through his empirical work. So he's submitted his thesis. You can see the title there, and you can see how closely his title relates to our topic today. And as you can see, his thesis documents causal evidence on how this mandate reshapes firm level financial performance, stock returns, cost of capital, financial constraints, environmental outcomes, and compliance behavior. And his work has already been published in a number of different publications there, and he's got more in the pipeline, so to speak. And his ongoing research extends this agenda into climate finance, green transition in emerging markets, and a comparative cross-country study of mandatory versus voluntary CSR and ESG, environmental social governance regimes. Next slide, please. We do have people patching in from around the world, and so a particular note of gratitude to those who are patching in from outside of North America or South America, because they are patching in at kind of oddball times of day and night. So that shows your dedication to the topic of corporate social responsibility. So props to all of you who are doing that. And just to let you know that if you do have a question or a comment or a thought while Atul is making his presentation and I'm interjecting with an occasional question or comment, if you have your own question or comment, email me, please, and I'll do my best to fold in your questions and comments into the conversation that we're having. So with that, Atul, again, we're very grateful for you taking the time to speak with us, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Webb. I'll just start with presenting slides then. Yeah. So slides are visible?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. So first of all, good morning and good afternoon, all of you. And thank you, Institute for Study of CSR, Toronto Metropolitan University, for giving me this opportunity to engage with all of you and present my work on mandatory CSR in India. And the evidence of world's largest corporate social responsibility spending mandate. So I'll start with I'll start with a shift of CSR over the century. So the debate on scholarly front between CSR is still evolving around the CSR definition itself, and would say what is rational for doing CSR. Taking from Milton Friedman's 1970s well discussed or well cited article to the recent development of CSR as a competitive strategy, or the nudge to have better market attraction, or have a competitive advantage of these activities. So, but still in all over the globe, there is a transition from all voluntary CSR to the mandatory CSR. Maybe in the nature of some places it's about disclosure, a disclosure of CSR report or CSR activity, whereas the India makes is the first case where CSR mandate becomes along with disclosure for spending, where the act mandates how a company has to spend some amount on CSR activity. So the question is, why study India? It's the world's largest, biggest spending CSR mandate with a decade of post-implementation data and transparent statutory thresholds. So it becomes very interesting, and it's a quasi-natural experiment, which what economists looking for to see what it affects on firm performance.
Oh, can you just go back to that original slide there? Just
Yes,
going to point out that Milton Friedman, a lot of, in particular, business professors basically stop at saying that Milton Friedman said, the business of business is business. And as you say there, the firm's sole responsibility is profit maximization. But actually, he does say it's profit maximization while complying with law and with ethical custom. So he does kind of qualify it a little bit. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, I think that's the fair point. He says profit maximization is the sole responsibility, but given the firm and manager plays within the rule. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So, so what is this experiment or what is this CSR law? In 2040, Indian government passed the Companies Act 2013, which says that companies qualifying certain criteria, which is net worth of 5 billion or more, turnover of 10 billion or more, or net profit of 50 million or more, has to spend 2% of their last 3 years net average profit on Schedule 7 activities. So along with that, this act require companies to form CSR committee which look over the CSR policy and the execution of that policy, and it constitutes minimum three directors with one independent directors. And it this act also, along with mandating companies to spend, it also asks companies to disclose these CSR activities and spending in their annual report. So this act doesn't just guide companies how much to spend, but it also guides where to spend and also to disclose this to greater public visibility. So this act also has evolved over the year. So when it was introduced, it was in a nature of comply or explain. If company is not complying with the law, company were asked why they are not able to comply with the act or with the rule. But then there was as the evidence will show or will discuss how the compliance has evolved over the year. Uh, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs or the ministry has introduced a what to say amendment that if company fails to comply with the law, that was in 2019-20 financial year, if companies fails to comply with the law, company will face monetary fines along with the person who is responsible to conduct and oversees the policy will be held for responsible for the consequences and may face the imprisonment. Evolving coming to 2021, then lately imprisonment was removed while the monetary penalties were continued. So far, looking back to a decade long of CSR, around 35,000 crores of CSR spending has spent last year. This is 250% growth compared to the earlier base year, and around 27,000 companies do report, or more than 27,000 companies do spend on CSR. So then question is, what is CSR is term? What is count as CSR? So as I said, there are only certain categories which are described in Schedule 7, which is considered as a CSR activities. Companies doing outside this heads or this menu doesn't count as a CSR. Even it for charity or whatever the purpose, act makes it very clear what will count as a CSR. So there are around 11 heads which overlooks from health, education to the environmental environmental sustainability and water conservation, sports, and gender equality. So these heads or the spending on these categories is termed as a CSR or CSR spending. So
Can I, sorry,
yeah,
just before you go any further on that.
yes,
So
sir.
the logic model behind the Indian approach is, if we can get companies to spend sums of money, as per, you have to have a minimum profit and so on and so forth on any one of these topics here, then that constitutes corporate social responsibility. So
Yeah,
that's the logic model, and that will be an improvement on the situation prior to the Companies Act approach being put in place. But does this mean, for example, that a company could be treating their workers poorly, or treating the environment poorly, or treating a community poorly, but if they actually do meet the 2% spending requirement, for example, because they support a local sports team, that they will be considered to be corporately socially responsible. Plus, of course, also meeting the other requirements that they've got the board members on their committee and that they disclose this publicly. But if they meet all of those requirements, that constitutes a thumbs up from the government of India. You have therefore conducted corporate social responsibility. Thank you very much. Is that correct? Am I correctly describing things?
Um, Partially, but I'll say along with these heads, companies look and these activities has to company has to conduct where they operate, where they
Right,
is
right. It's got to be a
yeah.
local sports team, for
It's a
example.
localized thing. Yes, yeah.
Yep,
That doesn't mean that companies has a license to behave non-ethically with their workers or polluting the local resources. But along with that, these funds are help to what to say enhance those activities, but that doesn't mean if a company spends on this, but you can't rule out the possibility of greenwashing or smoke green by doing and spending the amount and doing non-ethical practices behind the curtain. There is a possibility of that. So
right. Okay, so the only reason why I'm getting at that is because um, technically, when you hear the expression mandatory corporate social responsibility, it could be mandatory corporate social responsibility because the law says you must do this with respect to your workers. You must, with respect to your supply chain, you must ensure this is in place. Human rights, you must do a human rights impact assessment. You must ensure compliance with that, and with respect to the environment, you must do an environmental impact assessment, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's also mandatory CSR in some jurisdictions. But for purposes of the Indian law, it's if you meet the minimum requirements in terms of being a large company and you spend on one of these categories and you disclose that and you have the minimum number of directors who are CSR oriented, you have complied with the Companies Act. And so the company is in a position to say, I am fully in compliance with the Companies Act CSR requirements. And so therefore, Company X that I work for is a socially responsible company. And that's not greenwashing to say that. That would be something they could say, and they would not be open to any, for example, they would not be open to any lawsuits for misrepresentation or anything like that if they did that. Is that
yeah,
correct?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Well said, well said. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Please carry on.
Yeah. So in this talk, I'll talk about the 5 questions which I undertook while doing my research. Uh, so how does this mandatory CSR increase the CSR spending? In prima facie, it's very obvious that, uh, since it's mandatory, it should increase the spending. But you have to see underlying this problem is not trivial. I'll give an analogy. If there is a blood donation camp and 50 people are coming and donating their blood, and the blood donation camp organizer sees, oh, people are coming, I'll incentivize them through some monetary incentives. And it turned out in the second round, oh, people who are turned out for us blood donation is less than 50. Why that happened? It might be because the altruistic utility people used to derive from doing CSR or doing better has come down. So in that sense, how this enforcement and how this mandatory act has shaped the CSR spending, we will talk about it in detail. Then how does market or investor perceives this CSR spending? Does this put a toll on shareholders' wealth, or it makes uh, gives some benefits to shareholders or company? Then does this affect the company's financial constraints, cost of capital, both equity and debt, and how does it affect the environmental performance of the companies?
And
So yeah,
when you say environment, do you mean environment as in the natural ecosystem, or do you mean the social and natural environment together? Or why particularly are you singling out the environment? Because that seems to me to be the only part where you're actually looking at the real impacts on the community is environmental. Is that the case, or can
uh,
you explain that?
in environmental sense, I will looking up to particularly how, what is the impact on companies' energy intensity. So
Okay.
yeah.
So that's really the only in this list of questions, that's the only one where you're actually looking at the real impact, direct impact on the outside of the company, right?
Outside the company. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Well, just another point in terms of compliance with the law, and I know you're going, that's the first question you're going to address. If let's say I am a female owner of a company, and my husband is an athlete, and so what I do is he sets up a charity for uh, athletic activity, of which he's the main beneficiary of that. And so, is it possible to have what constitutes full compliance with this law for essentially the company to pick friends or pet projects of the CEO or whatever, and just funnel 2% of the funding to that, and that would constitute compliance for purposes of this legislation and for purposes of your study. That would you'd be saying that company is in compliance. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
To be precise, or to be companies have their own foundations, which are the trust or charity trust. Companies, not every companies, but big conglomerates do have their own foundations or charity trust. So some or sometimes most of the funds goes to those foundation, which were already were there while the act was come to establishment. Prior to that, they were working through that model. After that, also they continued with that, and some companies have started or established new foundations or trust and started working with this. So there is a possibility, and what you said, there is a possibility of that way also, and there is a way company do work on that line.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, to the much debated theory and logic that CSR is beneficial for the companies, that's as a stakeholder value view says of Freeman and all, through the reduction of asymmetry, information asymmetry, and giving the signal to the market, we are doing CSR because we value society, or we are doing good, as saying goes, doing good while doing well. Whereas the neoliberal school of economic theory, which says that the resources company has in hands are scarce, and it should be invested into the project which has a private net net present value positive. So this contradiction creates the tension that does this externally imposed CSR creates value or destroy it for shareholder, or it distribute cost and benefits across different stakeholders. So this was the central question I started to answering. What happens to the value creation around the companies? So these all stock return, financial constraint, and cost of capital. These measures are in line to answering this answer this particular question. Yeah.
Are you familiar
So
with are you familiar with the distinction between outputs and outcomes?
Yeah, yes, Professor.
So this does strike me as you're measuring outputs and not necessarily outcomes.
Not necessarily outcome. Yes.
Okay. All right. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So to explain the scenario or the sample for the study, the sample or the data is collected from the CMI Provis database, which is the well used database in Indian company level data, which provides financial and governance related data on the companies, both listed and unlisted. For CSR data, some data is uh, like source from National CSR portal. Some financial data is also sourced from Bloomberg terminal. For period for the study is from 2009 to 2023 for first compliance objective, 2010 to 22 for capital market related outcome. Sample varies from what objective we are looking for, and there are different toolkits I have used for doing my analysis. But main uh, identification test is a DID setup, where I look because of this a quasi-natural setup of this regulation. It divides companies into different categories, as I shown here, and I took treatment and control variable as B and C category, which were doing CSR prior to the act, but was not asked or not mandated after that as control group, and companies which were not doing earlier but asked to do as a treatment group. Sure. So coming to the first question, what happens to compliance and architecture of enforcement? So did mandate actually change the CSR spending? So as I give the analogy of a blood donation camp, when the mandate comes in, the earlier studies showed that mandate has actually crowd out the companies which were doing earlier more than what was asked. So there was a evidence shown that it actually crowd out the CSR spending. But those were very initial years of CSR spending. So I asked, okay, it has been a decade. What happens right now? So then I started looking for the data, and I have come to evidence that it has started as it is visible here. There is increasing trend in CSR spending. Yeah, but where this spending is, where does this spending goes? So as we see in the map, the most of the CSR spending is goes to the 5 highly industrial states out of 28 states in India. So the CSR spending is concentrated in already industrialized zones of India. So it actually goes to the area which were comparatively already much in well position than the other. And most of the time, this spending goes into the heads like education and health and rural development, which is particularly very good tick box for the companies to opt for, because it channelizes, like you donate for a school, or you donate for a school program or education program, and it counts as a CSR.
Would
So
it be also correct, though, Atul, that if you were to just, instead of having this map being a map of CSR spending, if it was a map of where are the 27,000 companies that are subject to the Companies Act CSR requirements, where are their headquarters? If that was just mapped on this, not their spending, just where are they headquartered, would it look very much like this map?
almost not as the same, but almost similar to like this, because mostly the companies are headquarters on big metropolitans like Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, or Delhi,
Right.
and the states which are in this the cities which are in these states are actually ahead in the spending in this map. So it won't distort this map much.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So then I start like what happens to the company's spending? Does companies are spending less than or equal to more than mandatory? Then I start seeing the patterns that okay, companies are progressively starting spending more than what is required, but uh, there are some companies which are still spending what is just required and getting a checkbox done. Yeah. So then what I did, I run the DID model, and I found that okay, the interaction term for the companies, because earlier results used to be shown that there is a crowding out for the treated group because of law has come, but that crowding out was for initial period. For the long period from 2009 to 23, there is no crowding out, and CSR has actually lead to improvement in CSR spending. That's the finding this result shows. But there is also a trend that there is CSR spending is uneven. Earlier, when the as I discussed, there is a progressive growth and changes in the or amendment in the law that in 2019 it was amended with a monetary and imprisonment provision. Then later it was removed. So I look up what happens to unspent amount. I see that when the law was introduced and it was comply or explain, there was tendency of companies to unspend the amount what was required. But since 2019, the amount required to spend has gone down. Like the unspent funds has gone down. Is the same shown in the table, which shows that up to 2019, the amount spent, what was asked and what was spent, the difference was statistically lower. But when the amendment was introduced along with monetary penalties and imprisonment, and later it was removed, the spending was not significantly different than what was required. So does enforcement credibility matters, or does it drives to the compliance behavior? I the result shows that yes, prior to the mandate, or when it was just comply or explain, the spending was gone up, but after introduction of fines and imprisonment, it has become greater than what was earlier. And after the removal of imprisonment, it stays at higher level, which shows that once the credibility is established, the spending stays on the higher level.
Atul, have there actually been any enforcement actions for companies that are not complying with the spending requirements?
Yes. There was cases where the companies were penalized for their non-compliance.
Many? Are there many of
Uh,
them?
no, not many. It's some double-digit number, if I'm not wrong.
Like double digit number as in not
Around
percentage, but in like 10,
uh,
15,
in a
20.
number was what was issued. Last one was 35 companies.
Okay. And is
It, it,
that,
it's very symbolic.
yes. And is it 35 was the last year and before that it was 31 and before that it was 28? Or was there any particular pattern in terms of actual enforcement numbers over time?
This what I told is cumulative number. It has in a progressive manner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then the question I asked, like, how does this spending goes ahead? Companies are complying because of legal risk, or they have a altruistic behavior or altruistic motivation to comply with it. So we figured out companies which are more which has a more legal risk will tend to comply with the law, and companies which has a less legal risk will try to go with comply or explain or spend minimum and report. We will spend or explain why they are short of it. So we proxy legal risk by the amount companies spend on legal fees. So we assume that companies which spends on legal fees are prone to more legal risk, and hence we took a proxy legal fees for a legal risk. And I again ran the same model, and I come to the finding that the companies which are more prone to legal risk are tend to comply with more than companies which are not prone to legal risk. And this is significantly different. So companies are complying because of legal risk, not because some altruistic motive. That's what I can reduce these numbers to. Then I look up around the different heterogeneity, like what kind of firm this is. Does it from manufacturing or services? The companies belongs to environmentally sensitive industry or non-sensitive? Does the affiliation of companies matter? Does this company is a standalone company or a part of a business group or conglomerate, or this company has a prior voluntary CSR spending? For all these heads, it turns out all companies, irrespective of what background they have come, has lead to higher CSR spending. So to conclude this finding, the mandate works on volume, but funds are clustered in a safe or visibly in the areas which are already industrially ahead compared to other India part. And because of legal risk, the compliance is higher. Now, coming to the second topic, which is what happens to the shareholders' value, which is more important for the shareholders. So the debate is again that CSR spending is supposed to go for the investment which is have a net present value positive. And since this investment or these resources are going for the society, what stock market perceives. So with the same setup, with the same companies, I took this treat the value as a proxy for a shareholders value is a stock return. And I come to the finding that it actually reduces the stock return. Then I ask this question, why? Yeah. So why market perceive this mandatory CSR as a compliance cost rather than investment in community? Because when CSR is voluntary, spending was a credible signal that company is doing well, and it is a signal for companies doing well and the governance of the company. When it becomes mandatory, the signaling value the CSR used to hold is lost, and market is not able to differentiate from the companies which were doing is earlier voluntary and now are forced to do it. So because the signaling value of the CSR has been lost, it perceived by market as a cost or the excessive tax than a value creating mechanism. Then I ask this question, okay, then does market differentiate between what companies spend? If the company spend exactly what it requires by the law, or above or the more than what is mandated? Then I created some dummy variable for those variables and run a dummy variable model, and I conclude that no matter the level of your spending, market doesn't differentiate once the level playing field is set for the CSR spending. So even if you spend exactly what is required or more than what is required, market perceive as a compliance rather than value creation. Yeah.
Interesting.
Then coming to all the robustness, all seven robustness, IBDID, group trends, honest DID. I will not go into this technicality, but all this robustness shows that it has lead to reduction in stock return for the treated group firm. Then the question is like how this operates. What is the mechanism? What will be the possible mechanism? Then we figured out that actually this mandatory CSR lead to increase in market beta, which is systematic risk, because companies are getting more legal risk or more risk of compliance or non-compliance, and this risk is not compensated by the positive cash flow in the future, rather than is a tax on the company's revenue or the profit. So it is a typical low risk anomaly, what we see in the financial literature, where the risk goes up, but the return doesn't goes as equally as what CAPM model suggests. So to conclude, investor price the regulation as a tax on a cash flow, not as an investment in shareholders' capital. And the market also perceives as a what is it? Rewards is in a negative stock return. So
So
again,
could we say, Atul, then basically what the law has done is it's made it so that no longer can investors look at CSR spending by companies as being a valid indicator of a company really doing something effective for CSR, rather they're just doing it because they have to do it, and now it's just plain another expense. Is that correct?
yeah,
Okay.
it distorts the signaling value CSR used to convey earlier. That's the more I think most striking results from the study, that when we look at the voluntary literature of CSR other than India, it always says CSR help companies to build trust, build social capital, and it returns in a long term to company. But in an Indian case, because in a voluntary scenario, CSR has that value, signaling value, that it conveys a message to the investors. Okay, the company is doing CSR. It also ESG fund manager take into the consideration when doing a decision about the company's CSR or ESG activity. But in Indian case, the signaling value of CSR is lost. I think this is one of the main finding coming out of this research.
Not looking good. Not looking good from the standpoint of what I would anticipate people were hoping for from this law, that it's having that impact. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. Yeah, on the same line, in a voluntary CSR literature, it shows that when companies invest in a CSR, the it ease the financial constraint for the companies, because investors sees both debtors and shareholders that company is doing good. So it eases the financial constraint. But that is not the case when it becomes mandatory, because it's an obligation, and it's again what do I say, outflow on your cash flow or cash holding. So the same results carry for the financial constraint. I measure financial constraint by Kaplan and Zingales index, then size and age index of Hadlock and Price, and WW index of Whited and Wu. These are the standard financial constraint measures in financial literature. But for all these index, what I found that when the law becomes mandatory for the treated firm, actually this law has tightened financial constraint than loosening it. So again, this is the contradiction to what voluntary CSR literature used to suggest. In the case or the institutional setting is changed when it becomes mandatory, and particularly not disclosure spending, because when you look to the literature which is mandatory CSR, but for disclosure, it actually eases financial constraint because it also signals the company's undertaking. But when it is what I say, a toll on company's cash flow or cash holding, it actually aggravates financial constraint for the treated firm. Then I look to this. Okay, the financial constraint has gone up, but from whom it has gone more? Like, it does uh, the capital raised by companies is the both debt or the equity capital, or the equity holders and creditors are perceiving this CSR is in the same way or in a different way, or they perceive CSR asymmetrically. What I interestingly found that creditors sees CSR as a good sign or a positive thing, and it lowers cost of debt, while as it increased the cost of equity. Why? I was like, why this has happened? It because both creditors and equity holders perceive CSR as a differently as a signaling value. For creditors, uh, creditor interprets mandatory CSR as a regulatory and reputational downside risk, and it's a mitigation. So if a company obliges with it, it reduces the downside risk, and it also shows that, oh, a company has a good stock, what to say, cash flow. So debt holders perceived it positively, and there is a reduction in cost of debt. Whereas for equity holders or the cost of equity front, it drives up.
Atul, I'm just noting the time and just wanting
Yeah, yeah.
to encourage you if there are some parts you want to highlight, other parts you want to skip over, given the amount
Yeah.
of time left, I
Yes.
leave that to you.
Yeah, I think I won't take more than 5 minutes. Now, coming out of the box from the financial side of companies, or what happens to stock return or cost of capital or financial constraint or compliance for the companies, but I see what happens to the general environmental outcomes, like energy intensity per se. Then I for with the same data, with the same identification strategy, here I use environmental outcome, or the proxy environmental outcome, through the energy intensity. That is how companies spend on energy, fuel, and power uh, with respect to their sales. And when I run the regression or the models, I figured it out that companies were mandated to do CSR actually observes reduction in their energy intensity.
Hmm.
But when I see where it happens mostly, I figured it out. It happens mostly in a service sector, and mostly in a environmentally non-sensitive sectors. This is again interesting finding, because manufacturing industries or environmentally sensitive industries are already on the tight observation of regulators or environmental standards. So they don't observe incremental impact of CSR much on their energy front, energy intensity firm. But those were outside of this ambient actually observes this improved energy intensity performance. So to conclude or synthesize, what mandatory CSR spending does. So there is a no one-way answer. There is a there is a trade-off on the sense that there is a private cost versus public benefit. So for the shareholders, a stock return goes down. Company faces higher financial constraints. Along with, there is a asymmetry between cost of equity and cost of debt, and CSR signaling value is lost. Whereas there is huge amount of private funds are moved for a social cause or social good, social cause or CSR activity. Then it also leads to a lower energy intensity. Yeah, is the same conclusion for the all five studies. These are takeaway. I'll come to the takeaways. If a time permits me, I would like to discuss that there is a debate going on that CSR can be a tool for handling polycrisis, and I think if you see Indian CSR or the Schedule 7, it overlaps those polycrisis heads. What is now under the discussion. So I think this area of research can be extended. Uh, but to come and to final takeaway, the mandatory CSR spending is not equal or not give the same benefit what voluntary CSR literature suggests. The enforcement credibility matters when the mandatory CSR spending was implemented. Then creditors and equity holders sees mandatory CSR spending differently. um, environmental front gains are real but condition on where you are looking, which industry you are looking, and design matters as much as the mandate. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Atul. This reminds me of something I notice in my classes. Unfortunately, I notice this in my classes, but I'm sure this is true worldwide. Um, and that is that students take my classes for a variety of different reasons. The vast majority of the students are interested in getting a mark. They just want a mark because if they can get a mark, a certain mark, whatever that mark might be, then they believe ultimately that's going to increase the likelihood of them getting a job or going on to graduate studies or whatever. They're not there actually to learn. The vast majority of them are not there to learn. They're just there to get the mark. And but because they all have to go through listening to me and then taking the exams and so on, there will be a small subset, a very small subset, um, who actually will learn something. And you'll see for them, what happens is they're not just saying, is that going to be on the test? For them, they come out of having taken the course, actually having learned something, and they start to apply that. Whereas the vast majority of students will immediately forget having ever taken the course. It was just a mark, and that's whatever. The reason why I bring that up is because I think that companies behave more or less the same way. Oh, you're requiring us to do that? What's the least costly way in which we can do it? We're just going to go through the motions. We're just going to go through the motions for the most part. We're not really caring about what it is you're talking about, but we'll find the way of doing it, which will be the least costly, and we really don't care. But I would suggest that with the Indian CSR approach, quite possibly there's going to be a small number of Indian companies who, because they are required to do something in this area through spending, maybe they will end up connecting with a stakeholder who really is impacted by what the company is doing. And that will start a genuine sort of engagement between the company and that particular stakeholder. And that will lead to some real substantive improvement on a particular issue, environmental issue, worker issue, consumer issue, community issue, human rights issue, as the case might be. But that's going to be a tiny, tiny fraction of all of the companies who will actually really benefit, substantively benefit from it. And that's an unfortunate effect of the way in which we teach in my classes. That's just a tiny number of students who actually really are there to learn, want to learn, do learn. And it's probably similarly just a tiny fraction of companies that substantively alter their behavior so that it's actually addressing their real environmental and social impacts. And perhaps they are provoked to do that, incentivized to do that, because there is a law that says 2% of your spending must be on one of these categories. I don't know whether or not you agree with that or disagree with that, but that's what occurs to me. Your findings support that sort of observation.
Yeah, I think that there is a very much or a large amount of companies which actually just do CSR as a tick box activity. As I show you the distribution also
Yeah.
on company wide distribution, like how they are spending equal to what is mandated, more than or less than. So there is a, I think, company proportionally more who are spending less than or what is just required, leave that more than. So I think there is a very small amount of subset of companies which actually taking CSR as a way of seeing things or doing things better for society, whereas companies we just do for the as a tick box activity to just comply with the regulation.
Well, it's of course disappointing to hear that, but it's also very good to have empirical support for that because perhaps that empirical support for that will lead to a change in approach in India. Do you think that's possible that there will be a change in approach? Or is now everybody so happy to be able to say, look, we spent this money, we're a good company because we spent this money? What do you think is the appetite for altering things to a much more effective approach to actually getting
Uh,
real substantive change?
I think when it was introduced, there was a resistance from a corporate world to CSR being mandatory. But over the decade, I think from the society or a media, CSR as portrayed as a nation building activity or contributing society, whereas also the political economy of CSR, because these funds are deployed in a local constituency of, let's say, a member of parliament or member of legislative assembly. They can utilize these funds for their what do I say, their benefit or maximizing outcome in their constituency. So there is this political economy also has evolved over a time period of the time. So uh, I think there might be the evolution, I can say, but it's very unlikely in a near future that the government or a company or corporation uh, uh, could go back up this track. And yeah, I think that's what I can see for right now. Because recently, I think this year, the bill has been introduced that only the threshold has been increased, which was
Mhm.
because of earlier what was 50 million is very low now. It's maybe say 100 million or 1 billion. So the criteria has been revised, but there's no consideration to going back or putting off this policy in near
Right.
future at least.
So it's just more of the same. Okay, well, that's again, that's disappointing, but hopefully your research will push some part of Indian society to push the government to change its approach. And but in the meantime, wishing you success in your defense, and on behalf of Toronto Metropolitan University and the CSR Institute in particular, thank you very much for taking the time. Best of luck and future success in your studies and beyond, as the case might be.
Thank you for this opportunity to present my work.
Thanks.
And it's
All the
it's a
best.
really good time. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.